The respiratory system. So class, today we're going to learn about the respiratory system. So I know a lot of you may be confused on how it works, what it does, and what does it consist of. But don't worry, by the end of this podcast, you'll be able to answer all these questions. The respiratory system. So the basic functions of the respiratory system include breathing, gas conditioning, gas exchange, protection of the respiratory surfaces, and also sight for olfactory sensation. So breathing is pulmonary ventilation. So this is pretty much the movement of air in and out of the lungs. Inhalation, aspiration, draws gases into the lungs. Exhalation, expiration, forces gases out of the lungs. So you'll notice when you breathe in oxygen, which is O2, and then you exhale carbon dioxide, which is CO2. Gas conditioning. As gases pass through the nasal cavity and paranasal sinuses, inhaled air becomes turbulent. The gases in the air are warm to the body temperature. They're humidified. They're cleaned, like your nose hairs filters the particles, so nothing, bad enters your body. And then gas exchange, which is respiration. And it supplies the body with oxygen, like I said before, and it disposes of carbon dioxide, as said earlier. So there are 4 different processes for respiration to happen. The first is the pulmonary ventilation, which is moving the air into and out of the lungs. Then it's the external respiration, which is the gas exchange between the lungs and the blood. The third is transport, the transport of oxygen and carbon dioxide between the lungs and the tissues. So oxygen comes into the lungs and tissues, and carbon dioxide leaves the lungs and tissues. Internal respiration is the gas exchange between systemic blood vessels and tissues. So the major organs of the respiratory system. Here's a picture of the respiratory system. You see right here is the nasal cavity. Here's the nostril. Right here is the oral cavity. The pharynx is right here. Trachea, larynx, the main bronchus, the right main bronchus, the left main bronchus, right lung, left lung, diaphragm, the carina trachea, which is at the base. So the respiratory system consists of respiratory muscles, which is the diaphragm and other muscles that promote ventilation. Because as you notice, when you breathe in and out, you see your diaphragm rises when you inhale, and then when you exhale, it lowers. So the respiratory zone. So this is the site of external respiration. The respiratory bronchioles, alveolar ducts, alveolar sacs, and alveoli. So conducting zones provide rigid conduits for air to reach the sites of gas exchange. This includes the nose, the nasal cavity, the pharynx, the trachea. The air passes undergo 23 orders of branching in the lungs, as you can see from this picture. The nose. The nose provides an airway for respiration. It moistens the air and warms the air, and it filters the inhaled air. Also, the nose is the house for olfactory receptors. This is what the nose helps you smell and distinguish different smells. The skin around the nose is very thin, as you can see. a picture of the nose, the thin layer of the skin, the nasal bone, the septal cartilage. So the nasal cavities has many different things. This is a picture right here of the nasal cavities. So it has external nares, which are nostrils, and it's divided by the nasal septum. The vestibula anterior opening also it's continuous with the nasal pharynx. There are two types of mucous membrane, olfactory mucosa and respiratory mucosa. Olfactory mucosa near the roof of the nasal cavity houses olfactory receptors. Respiratory mucosa lines nasal cavity, as you can see in this. Well, you kind of see in this picture. And this is just another picture of the side, the lateral view of the nasal cavity. So the nasal conchae. So there are three paired bony projections along the lateral walls of the nasal cavity. I don't know, try to feel them right here. Superior and middle nasal conchae, part of the ethmoid bone. Inferior nasal conchae, separate bone. Function, particulate matter deflected to mucus-coated surfaces. So this is just pictures of the paranasal sinuses. So the pharynx. The pharynx is right here. Funnel-shaped passageway. It connects the nasal cavity and the mouth. It's shared by also the digestive and respiratory systems. It's divided into three sections by location. The nasal pharynx, which is right here. The oropharynx, which is right here. And the laryngopharynx, which is right here. So the nasal pharynx only acts as an air passageway. It doesn't act as anything else. The oropharynx. So there's two types of tonsils in the oropharynx. The palatine tonsils, which is in the lateral walls of the fauces, and then the lingual tonsils, which cover the posterior surface of the tongue. So the laryngopharynx, which is, right here, it's the last pharynx. It's at the bottom of the throat, right before you get the trachea, which is right here. It's at the bottom of the pharynx. So it's the passageway for both food and air. So it is covered with epithelium, stratified squamous epithelium. So the larynx. The larynx prevents food and drink from entering the trachea. So it acts as a barrier. It protects it, in a sense. And the larynx produces sound, and it's connected to the pharynx and to the trachea. And this is a picture. The top part is the epiglottis, and that's the flap that opens and closes when you breathe, and then closes when, it opens when you're breathing, and then it closes when you're eating. So the 9 cartilages of the larynx. So there's 9 cartilages of the larynx. The thyroid cartilage, which is like your Adam's apple. You can actually feel your Adam's apple. Then there's another 3 pair of small cartilages. Then there's the epiglottis, which helps with swallowing. Okay, so the larynx. Right here you see an interior picture of the larynx. You see the base of the tongue, the larynx, the lateral muscle right here. the vocal cords, which are right here. And the vocal cords act in the sound production. And then loudness depends on like the force of air across the vocal folds. The trachea. The trachea is a C-shaped cartilage ring, and it keeps the airway open. The carina marks where trachea divides into two primary bronchi, which is like, so it'd be right here. And then you see how it opens right here. So the trachea, this is just another picture of the trachea. So this is just the bronchi, how there's a primary, and then there's a secondary. So the tissue composition of conducting zone. So it changes along the pathway. It's normally by supportive connective tissue, but then like the epithelia changes. So it varies. So lobes and surfaces of the lungs. So the right lung has 3 lobes and the left lung has 2 lobes. As you can see right here, the right lung has a superior lobe, inferior lobe, and middle lobe, while the left lung has superior lobe and inferior lobe. And the bronchi enter the lungs at the hilus, so the pleurae. So it's a double-layered sac surrounding each lung, so it acts as protection. Pleural cavity is a potential space between the visceral and the parietal pleurae. Pleurae helps divide the thoracic cavity into the central mediastinum and the 2 lateral pleural compartments. And you see a picture of like something covering it. This is the pleurae covering the left and right lungs, and then you see how it divides the mediastinum and then the 2 pleural parts. So the structures of the respiratory zone. So it consists of air exchanges structures, and then the respiratory bronchioles. They branch from the terminal bronchioles from the primary, and they lead to alveolar ducts, alveolar sacs. You can see right here is the trachea. The carina is right here. Then it breaks into bronchiole, and then it breaks primary bronchiole, then it breaks into secondary bronchiole, and then it breaks into alveolar ducts, and then with the sacs. This is just another picture of how the alveolar ducts look like. As you can see, based on this microscope representation. And the little dots are the alveoli, and this is the duct, and right in the middle is the atrium. So the functions of the alveoli. So the alveoli has 3 different types of cell types. Type 1, type 2, and macrophages. So type 1 cells are the site of gas exchange. Type 2 cells secrete surfactant. And then the third type of alveoli is macrophages. So it's surrounded by basal, laminae, and elastic fibers. Interconnect by way of alveolar pores. And then internal surfaces are the site for free movement of alveolar macrophages. Right here you see some capillaries, elastic fibers, type 2 surfactant secreting cell, type 1 cell of alveolar wall. So that's all for today, guys. I hope you enjoyed this podcast, and feel free to go back to the podcast, rewind, pause, study off the slides, because I guarantee you